Welcome to Your Brand Amplified, the podcast where we interview marketers, publicists, and brands to learn their stories, what makes them tick, and tips and tricks that make a difference. I am ecstatic, over the moon, in the calmest, but least calm of ways today to have Henry Cameron Allen on the show. I've been on your podcast. There's so much we can unpack. You have so many projects going on. You are a career director, a performer, visual artist, writer, life skills mentor, counselor, consultant, educator, nonprofit founder, and you have such spring of so many things that you do and your creativity. I don't even know where to start to say thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a gift. It's really, really a gift to know you and to share time with you this way. It's very exciting. I'm very proud of you for all the incredible work that you're doing in the world. And I'm just humbled to be somewhere out here in the wings.
Mutual admiration. So yeah. Do you want to talk about, because I know on your podcast, you do talk a lot about your background and what's led you to the brand that you are today and all that you do today. But for my listeners, they may not have had a chance to listen to Lost Travelers yet. So I'd love for you to start from the very beginning-ish.
Very good place to start. I was born in Washington, D.C., and my dad was a career diplomat for the U.S. State Department, and he was a cultural diplomat. He worked for a branch of government called the USIA, which no longer exists. It's the U.S. Information Agency, and it was essentially the propaganda wing of the U.S. government. In the 50s, 60s, early 70s, this is before there was a McDonald's outside of the United States. Yes, there was a time. And so their task, their mission, just in a nutshell, was to take all of the essentially appropriated culture that formed what we knew America as at that time. And it wasn't just fast food. It did include that. But it was also Broadway, and it was industry, aerospace, and business, and the Olympics, sports arena, and all of this. And my dad produced these huge expos of American culture in these airplane hangars, right? So it was an expo, as you can imagine it, on a grand scale, the likes of which no one had seen yet. And I grew up through looking at my own country through that lens, right? We lived in Austria, Soviet Union, South America, Cuba even. And it was just an amazing way to experience the world the way that most Americans, especially kids, never get even a semblance of. And you hear, I came back to America, finished high school, and I heard things that I had never heard before, like, God bless America. Like, nobody else says that. Nobody else says, God bless my country, forsaking all others, That's a very American thing. And also I heard the expression, I don't have a creative bone in my body. That one really hit me hard, because everywhere else that I had lived, creativity is the cornerstone of the culture. It's the cornerstone of education and upbringing. And so to come back to a country that did not validate that, did not engage on that level, it's children who are the future. They have to imagine. The imagination is a muscle that needs to be worked. And for 50 years, we have not been doing that. And so that was something that really hit me hard when I came back to the States. I went to university, but the academic world did not really gel with me, especially because my interest was in the arts and in theater specifically. And all of my advisors and theater faculty said to me, Henry, you're really talented. Why are you here? You could be out there working right now. Why are you here? Do you want to get a PhD in theater history? Because that would make sense.
Right.
So much to the chagrin of my father, I ended my academic career and did what they said, get out into the world and start your art. So I did, and it led me on a path which was really interesting because I ended up going to graduate school, my master's of fine arts in theater at the National Theater Conservatory in Denver, Colorado, which is it was the only congressionally chartered theater master's program in the country, chartered by FDR, actually. So way back. And I was invited into the program. And I said, but I don't have an undergraduate degree. And they said, well, that doesn't matter. You don't get the MFA after your name, but you can say you are a graduate of the MFA program at the National Theater Conservatory, and that's basically the same thing. Yeah, so I did that for 3 years, finished, and got on with it. And so I've had a long career as a theater artist. I moved from being an actor to being a director because I felt like my voice was bigger than being an actor in a play. My arms were bigger than one audience. I needed to really, expand. And that's been a motif in my life ever since, both as a theater artist, as an educator, working in Waldorf schools for many years, Waldorf education, both as an educator and an administrator, admissions and so forth. And when I was working at the high school level, I was asked to develop a life skills curriculum, all 4 years of high school. And that was my introduction to life skills as a theme of study, a focus of study and conversation too, because I had never heard those words used. I mean, I was thinking home ec, but universal life skills are the skills that every single one of us will learn and apply daily throughout our lives, all 8 billion plus of us on the planet. Communication skills, environmental literacy, communication skills, grieving, nutrition, health, well-being overall, sexual literacy, emotional literacy, all of these things that we all will learn. It's not a question of that. It's a question of how well will we learn them and from whom. So that's what got me into life skills, and I have not stopped. And so that's what the Lost Traveler podcast is about, universal life skills conversations for our time specifically.
There are so many things that I want to touch on that you've just said. One is, so I'm envisioning world fairs, but just centered on the United States in these countries, which is such an interesting concept, right? Kind of feeds into the concept that other countries have of us today. The United States person going over as the ugly American and traveling, and how we're very centered on being American versus being members of the world population and how we interact with each other, right? The other education is another one. I left school, high school, I graduated early to start college, every summer, like from the time I was a freshman in high school on. But then I didn't see what I wanted to pursue where I lived. And so I ended up dropping out and pursuing my education later as well. And realized even for marketing and PR, I learned a lot more from learning it and doing it. Now, there are things that I didn't learn that would have been really great to learn through and skill build through education and taking those classes. But I learned a lot. And that's really what's brought me to have the career I have today. So I'm curious why you went back to school. Was it because the prestige of the program? Because you obviously didn't need to go to school for what you do.
Right. That was part of it. I think that when one is a budding actor, prestige matters, and you're going into one of the most competitive fields that exists. When we're talking about not just live theater, but film as well, and television, and now streaming, which didn't exist at the time. I think that, anyone who has gone to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts or Juilliard or, they put their brand on you. Really. I mean, you can tell by the way someone acts where they studied, what school of acting they're coming from. And after 3 years of doing that program and the accumulation of $40,000 in debt, which I didn't have before that, and I had never been taught financial literacy ever in school or at home, so I didn't know how to handle that, right? Fortunately, I was in a position later on where I bought my own house. I was able to refinance my house and pay off my student loans.
Congratulations.
That was huge, but nobody taught me that. Right? Life skills. So I went back. I had a decision to make. I thought, here's a prestigious program that's inviting me because they had seen my work and they thought I could be an asset to the program. They invited me in. And so I thought, as I do, I notice moments. And many of these moments, all of these moments really are pivotal in the course of the rest of your life. And so what I learned in the course of those 3 years were not necessarily helpful to me as an artist, other than they taught me how I don't want to be as an artist. They taught me, that was a big one. I did have teachers who I'm still in touch with who gave me little pearls in the palm of my hand, right? I learned the art of surrender at the National Theatre Conservatory because I had a voice teacher who said, surrender is not giving up anything. It's giving in. It's giving in to the process that you have no control over. She said, it's like whitewater rafting. Before you even leave the shore, have you ever been?
Yeah. I love rafting.
I love rafting. And what do they tell you before you even leave the shore? They say, if you fall out of the boat, what do? You don't flail around and grab onto the closest boulder or branch to hang on for dear life. You lean back.
Yep.
Your feet up.
I was just doing the motion. You lean back, you hold on to your
grab your vest, right? Trust that you can float, and the water will carry you effortlessly around those boulders to calmer waters, right? The current will carry you. So I've learned to apply that not only in my art, and I'm no longer an actor, I'm a director, but I'm a better director for having been an actor first. But I've been able to apply that to my life and really trust myself, trust that I can float, trust that the current will invariably lead me to calmer waters and take me on an unexpected adventure. My life is not boring, that's for sure, right? But you're right, there are skills that are better learned on the job than in a classroom. The great late composer Stephen Sondheim, who wrote West Side Story and Into the Woods, right? Everybody knows his work. He was a friend, and he said to me when I was in graduate school, which is when I met him, I was asking him about the value of formal education in the arts. And he said, you can always take a master class to build your skills, and you should. But an artist's training in the theater really ought to be on stage, even if you're sweeping the stage, even if you're backstage pulling the curtain in the wings, you're watching the masters at work and you're hanging out with them after the show, right? In their dressing rooms or going out for a drink afterwards or whatever. And you're gleaning, you're taking a master class just by being there. And I really encourage young artists, people who are creative, take master classes instead of putting yourself in debt by going to a formalized training. And no dish to the grade schools and the ateliers out there, but really I found that was the right, I'm glad I did it because it showed me that I didn't want to be that kind of an artist. I didn't want to have someone else's brand on my bum. I wanted my own brand on my bum. I lost most of the truth in my acting after 3 years of this program because I was bowing to someone else's style and someone else's brand and someone else's truth. And so it took one really good director out of graduate school to click me back into my own truth as an artist. Thank goodness for that. And now I get to be that director.
That's the best place to be, I think, as educators, as a director, is helping people find who they are and not just trying to take it away from them, as you mentioned. And I think it's interesting because you talked about, and it is true, right? The U.S. educational system was set up for factory workers. You show up on time, you do these classes, you do this, you get rewarded, you're done, you clock out at the end of the day. We have seen a few changes where we now have the A, instead of it is STEM, we have STEAM. And I see the connection because my daughter is very focused on science and math. And I mean, yesterday she texted me because she got a 92 on her math test and was horrified. And I'm not horrified. I'm trying to like talk her down and say, think about, okay, I am proud of you, but if you're not happy, is it because you were going too fast? Is it because you didn't know the material? You hadn't studied enough? Like, think about what the root cause, right, behind that so that you can do better. Because I'm happy that, I mean, a 92 is an A, like, that's fantastic. But she's also artistic. She chooses not to take art class in school. She does it weekends because she wants it to just be her fun, passionate thing, which is cool. But I do see the connection between the way that your brain works. You have to have the creativity and that outlet in order to function better in these other areas?
Arts education is a hot topic right now. And I'll tell you that if you're in America, it is really hard to see the forest for the trees. If you have kids that are in the traditional American system, and there are non-traditional schools available if you have money, usually they're private, and there are some charter schools out there, but the rest of the world looks at America and does a whole lot of, because everything has been forsaken for standardized testing. And the stress that children are under to perform in a standardized way when there is no standardized child, I'm glad that it went from STEM to STEAM, but not every school adds the A, right? There are still schools that have now eliminated their arts program completely because they don't fit into the standardized. That's what being a creative artist is that you're not standard, right? And it's no different than the Industrial Revolution when our current educational system was developed to get children out of nature, off of farms, into a classroom, in a seat, sitting for hours and hours and hours, not breathing fresh air, not interacting with the natural world that they are part of, not separate from, and working with animals and so forth and so on. But to train them in a dehumanizing way to be factory workers. Now, because of robotics, because of the technological advances that we've had since the Industrial Revolution, it's no longer getting kids ready for factory work. It's getting kids ready for corporate work, corporate world, sitting in a cubicle on a floor of hundreds of other people, faceless, nameless people. You could be working with somebody on a project and know nothing about them. There's no trust building. And that's why the arts are important, because it does hit so many other boxes. It supports the STEM, right? You're learning mathematics in music and in art. You're learning measurements. You're learning about, scientific, you're learning chemistry in cooking, right? In theater, you're also building sets. You're also learning trust and teamwork. Conventional people who are not educators, who are not artists, who are making the decisions for schools. And I do think parents have more power than they think they do or have been told that they do. Supply and demand, right? I mean, if you go and demand it, you attend all the school meetings, you can make a difference in your community. But you have to know. And this is the problem with, especially around life skills, is that it's not taught generally in schools. It's left to parents to figure out how to teach their children essential universal life skills. And most parents are deficient in the very skills they're expected to teach their children. So how do we formalize this training, this education? Of course, it's going to be different for everybody, but the essential skills are the same that we are learning. If you're trading stocks on Wall Street, for instance, and somebody else is trading a handful of eggs for a handful of rice in a mud hut in the Congo, it's still the same gesture. It's still the same skill. The proficiency and the approach is different, but it's the same skill, right? We all learn how to communicate. We all learn how to grieve. We all learn how to care for ourselves, etc. And so if we just start there and introduce in a formal way opportunities, which is why I started the Lost Traveler podcast, is to get these conversations going publicly, to make people think, where are my deficiencies, right, in my skill levels? And where am I proficient? And if I can acknowledge my deficiencies and then go out and say, I'm going to go and take a master class with somebody who knows better than I do, right? It's like if I wanted to learn a foreign language or a sport or a cooking technique or a violin, whatever, you go and find somebody who's got the skills to teach you how to elevate your skill level. It's not rocket science. And so go and find those people. They're out there. We are always out here saying, hey, come, ooh, right? But we're taught to accept our deficiencies and just follow what we're told by politicians, by the medical industry, by educational systems that no longer work. They're way outdated.
Are you ready to take your brand to new heights? Join the Brand Amplifier for Entrepreneurs program. Learn how to build, elevate, and amplify your brand with a comprehensive 10-module course. Learn more about it and other ways to implement our strategies at fullcapacitymarketing.com. Click on EFCM Learning Hub for more information. Can't wait to help you amplify your brand. I do think we're seeing a slow shift, a lot of it propagated by being at home for a few years. With COVID, people really having to take a look at who they are and who they want to be and how they want to live their lives and things they want to weave into that narrative. So I feel like there is a shift. It's slow. We're also seeing that, to your point, with technology and robotics and AI, there are different jobs that are available that people need. We need as workers and a skilled workforce, which might look different than what we needed 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And it doesn't mean you have to get a 4-year or a master's or a PhD for a lot of these. We still need those people too.
Of course.
Yeah, but we also need people who are like, hey, I have a different path. I can just go get a certification, or I can go do this or that. I can do an apprenticeship. There are so many different ways that you can get to that. But this universal life skills is such a big component. And you grew up all over the world. I grew up with a father who had lived all over the world, military, and a mom came from Thailand. And things are very different when you come from one country to the next of how people do things, right? So the universal life skills education you're talking about would be an equalizer for people to kind of level set and help people learn exactly what you said, like, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. How do I figure out how to get that knowledge and feel like they have the buy-in, I don't know if that's the right word, or they have the permission, if you will, to take that step forward. And it's sometimes we need that little nudge, right? That external permission to do something that we know internally that we should be able to do, but we might not feel ready.
And those of us who are permission givers, I think the best permission givers are not standing over anyone in a superior way saying, I have these skills and here's what you have to do. This is what drives me nuts, is when people ask to be on my podcast and they've got a new book that promises, here's the answer to all your problems, right? Nobody has the answer. We don't even know what consciousness is. Not one scientist on the planet can tell you what consciousness is. We don't know whether our dream state or our waking state are what's real, or if they're both real. No scientist can tell you that. No religious leader can tell you that. No spiritual leader. I mean, this is why I feel called to this life skills work. In fact, that's my overarching purpose. When a deep joy in your soul meets a great need in the world, that is your purpose. That's your calling. It's what calls to you and what calls from you. That is my overarching purpose. Under that umbrella, I have my passions. I have my talents. And hopefully the talents mesh with your passions. I know people really don't. But my theater work is one passion, which is a vehicle for universal life skills. My philanthropic and charitable work is a passion. It's also a vehicle for universal life skills. And my counseling, which I would include my podcasts. I have another one as well called the Peregrine Dad Cast, which addresses men's grief publicly.
Well, and you just did a perfect, because this is a different kind of episode than I often have, right? We're not talking about SEO or video marketing or how to get lead gen on LinkedIn or other things. But when it comes down to it, your brand amplified is about celebrating who we are, why we exist, and how we get that message out to the right people at the right time. And that's exactly what you're talking about yourself, your personal ethos, your purpose, the reason you're here. I'd love for you to talk about, because we haven't gotten into Peregrines and podcast and the purpose and reason behind that. So before I started asking all these questions, we got to your creating life skills trainings for schools. Now you had a son, and I know that Cameron's been a big motivator for everything that you do. So if you are willing to share a little bit about that journey and share about the Peregrines and what your mission is there, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying his name. You know, when a parent has outlived a child, which is what we call peregrines, because up till now, there's been no word like widow or orphan to identify a parent who has outlived a child. And that's globally. That's in every language. Believe me, I've looked, I've researched. What's that about, right? So I think that in part it's a profound experience to outlive your child. I'm avoiding the word loss on purpose because those of us that have experienced this grief journey, or our children, our kids are not a set of keys or a favorite scarf. We know precisely where they are. And so I'm out to change the world in terms of how we talk about this journey, because children have been dying since the beginning of people. This is nothing new. And yet globally, we don't do it well. We don't handle it well. We don't, I hear all the time, I'm so sorry for your loss. Or it's the worst thing that could happen to a person, or it's unnatural. Talk to every peregrine and they're going to tell you they get the same thing all the time. And it brings up this, like, how can you talk about something you know nothing about? So I'm here. I started the Lost Travelers Club, which is the Lost Traveler podcast is not about the grief journey. We do some episodes about it, but it's really a funding source and to raise awareness about the Lost Travelers Club, which is an empowerment organization, nonprofit organization, to bring peregrines together in a way that allows us to channel our grief into service, channel our grief into goodness. What I've come to, and my dreams are very productive, and the peregrine motif actually came out of a dream I had where a peregrine falcon swooped down out of the sky, landed in front of me, looked up and said, "It's time." And I woke up and I knew exactly what it meant. And the word is peregrine. The word is peregrine. If you look back to the ancient Latin that it came from, I love etymology, going back to the roots of words. It meant a stranger in a field or a lost traveler. Go figure. It also means pilgrim, someone who's on a sacred journey, which we are as peregrines. In fact, in Spanish and in Portuguese and other Latin-based languages, the word for pilgrim is peregrino. And the peregrine falcon is native to every continent on Earth except for Antarctica. So it's a universal symbol. And in most cultures, it represents courage, resilience, strength, which we all have to embody when we go on this grief journey, this kind of a grief journey. So it ticked all the boxes, and I changed my branding. I changed the logo. I started using peregrine, encouraging other people to use peregrine to describe parents who have outlived a child. I changed our tagline from parents of child loss getting there together to surviving parents getting there together. When you read an obituary, the person who is deceased is survived by their parents or their aunt, their grandparents or brother, sister, whatever, right? So that's what survival is. There is no healing from this. There's only enduring and coping. And there are ways to do it, but it takes acceptance first and acknowledgement. And if you cannot walk through the world and have somebody ask you, "Oh, do you have any kids?" Before now, I had to crack open my chest and pour all my most private, personal, worst pain of my life out on the table to describe what happened every time. It's exhausting. Now I can say I'm a peregrine. And the more people who understand what that means, like widow or orphan, that's enough said, right? And so by starting the LTC, Lost Travelers Club, Peregrine Dadcast, which is on YouTube, weekly talk show about men's grief, we're putting a face to it, we're putting a name to it, and we're exhibiting by example. And that's what I started to say earlier, is that we cannot impose on other people how to be in the world. You can lead a horse to water, right? But if we can show people by how we navigate our lives and our challenges, no matter what the challenge is, with every challenge comes an opportunity. And if we can take that opportunity to channel those challenges into goodness, then everybody has permission. Everyone who's a witness to your life has permission to do the same. And that is no different for any industry. That's no different for any purpose or passion or cultivation of a brand, it has to start with the frequency of love. You have to love what you're doing in order for it to be effective. I'm convinced of that. I think that's the only frequency that exists. Everything else is baloney.
I will say, when you are passionate about something and you're living in your full truth and full being and essence, when you're describing what paragons are, I got chills. And talk about shifting a few words, right? Using a few words to changes completely what the meaning of your mission is. Making those little tweaks to your brand shares who you are, what you're passionate about, what you're throwing love into, and how you're pouring out of your grief, you're pouring love into so many others and helping them find their way so that they may help others find their way and keep spreading this message of love and resilience. That's so powerful to think about. And if you're not living in that space where you really are authentically living, again, just using the word brand, because we all are a brand, right? Who we are, our essence. And if you're not fully living in that and happy about where you are, to me, it's very obvious. Roadblocks keep being put up, right? Doors don't open. But when you are living that, things open up in a full different way. You can be doing the same exact thing, but just by having that openness and that love and that passion and bringing it to the world.
I think that you're right. You're absolutely right. And I would love to see more entrepreneurs out there who are owning their own brand, be it their own name, be it their own creative artistic vision, whatever it is. I've just been through a really tough time because I had a brand. I had my theater company, the Folklore Theater Company, and it was 10 years and it was hugely successful. And I was ready for a shift. I was ready for a change. Something was happening in me. And usually when you accept and acknowledge that something is shifting, trust yourself, trust your gut always. The right thing will manifest. And this guy manifested and he offered me a shift, just exactly the shift I wanted. You have to be careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. And he took up my vision and we created a brand together. It came to me in a dream. I mean, it all comes to me in dreams. It's amazing. And he was funding it. He was producing it. He was everything. He owns the brand, right? I became then a cog in the wheel. I was doing all the work and someone else is getting all the glory, and the machine wasn't working. And when a machine isn't working, at some point, you got to get an engineer to come in, break down the problem, redesign the machine, right? And that's what happened here. The machine completely broke down and it put me back to square one. And I realized that by giving my brand away, which is in essence my power, myself with a capital S, I lost the rights to my creative work. That's a huge message for our time. When you give your power away on a silver platter for a lot of promises, a lot of pie in the sky, building castles in midair, promises. And I had to go there. I had to go through that so I know what it feels like. So now I can remove that boulder out of someone else's path, right? If that's our intention throughout every aspect of our life, if we are learning, there's no such thing as failure. If you're learning from something, that you then can mentor somebody else or show them how to get around that pitfall, right? And so now, guess what I'm back to? I'm back to the Folklore Theater Company. And what happens in folklore and fairy tales, the princess is under a spell for 7 years. She falls asleep. And it just takes, love's first kiss to bring it back, to life. And that's what's just happened. Even just today, I'm bringing back the Folklore Theater Company, but on new terms, with a new mission, a new brand, a new vision. And it's like the spell was broken. So allow for magic, allow for the unexpected. Don't feel like you've got to put yourself into somebody else's box that was not constructed to your dimensions. When I was in high school, I wanted to have a t-shirt too big for the box. I still might do that. So nobody steal that. That's mine. Too big for the box. I'm too big for anyone's pre-constructed, prefabricated particle board box, right? Be free. Trust yourself. If it feels right, it is right. Even if you arrive at a point B that isn't what you expected or necessarily what you wanted, it will magically turn into a new point A.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know before we got on, you said you were going through some tough times. I didn't really know if we wanted to go into that or not, but how powerful for you to share that you got what you wanted, but you went into and I think so many people do this. We see, I want to get here. Oh, that person's offering me this. I'm going to take it. And then we realize later, ooh, the devil's in the details. Maybe I didn't exactly manifest what I wanted, or I was being tested and there are these other things that I didn't consider that I should have considered. So you really have to think through if you're going into partnership with somebody. And as you said, giving your power away. So I'm glad that you have your power back. I'm glad that you were able to keep control of the name and make it what you envisioned to begin with again.
Well, the folklore name was mine to begin with. The Folklore Theater Company, that was completely mine. The Luminos Project, which is the company that we were developing together under the umbrella of his company, but he owns all the rights to the work that we did and the name and the web domains and everything else. So I am now cutting that dinghy loose because I have the power to do that. When I made that shift from being my own theater company into being under the umbrella of someone else's, I had a really good instinct that I want to share with your listeners. When I made that transition, I didn't close down the Folklore Theater Company. I hung it up on a peg and I started an LLC. I started Folklore LLC just in case.
Smart.
That was the best decision, because now that I'm making this transition unexpectedly, I have the infrastructure already in place to take it on myself and to revitalize my brand, the Folklore Theater Company, and make it even more powerful than it was, right? Before it was community centered to one place. It was protecting and preserving the stories that were place specific. Now it's global. Now my website is folklore.world. I mean, it is a global effort, and my company is global. I have actors and directors and writers from countries all over the world doing this, seeing this through my lens, that this is a rescue mission to protect the stories that are dying with the people that carry them, that define our humanity, right? And that we can learn from. 2014, the UN called me. I thought I was being punked. And they sent me to Fiji. They said, we want to send you to Fiji for 2 weeks to do a workshop, develop a workshop in creative activism using folkloric theater as a vehicle for positive change for the indigenous youth of Fiji. I'm like, who gets that offer ever? So, of course, I listened to my gut. I said, yes, this is right. Right? That broke me out of the local and into the global stage. And so it was a wildly successful experience that gave permission to these young people to use their stories toward positive change in their country. And for themselves too. I mean, it was amazing. Amazing. Not as the big white American guy coming down saying, all right, little brown people, here's how you do it the American way. I'm not your typical American. It had to come out of them. And in fact, if you go back to the Latin root of the word education, it doesn't mean to thrust information into somebody's head. That's intrudo. That's intrudo. And getting back to the education conversation, right? Education has become very intrusive. How much can we stuff into a little brain and have them regurgitate it back? No, education means to lead out of or to draw out of, like water from a well. We are made of everything that the rest of the universe is. We have all the wisdom of the known and the unknown already within us. And a good educator, a good teacher will lead out of a person what already lives in them. It's a revealing of truth that already lives in all of us. We all have inner children that didn't get that. So it's never too late.
Let's talk now about, because you don't live in the United States now. Your journey's taken you on this international playing field again. And you've teased out a little bit about what life looks like. So what are some important priorities for you? Where are you in the world now? And how can people help with your mission?
Thank you.
Missions.
Missions. Well, again, you look back in hindsight and you see how everything leads to the next thing so clearly. It leads you to where you are in the moment that you're in. And in this moment, I am living in a tiny little remote ancient village in southwestern Spain. Look at my ceilings. This is an 800-year-old house. Okay. It's the town is Arroyo Molinos de Montanches, and it's in the Extremadura region of Spain, which is nobody's heard of because everybody knows Barcelona. Everybody wants to go to the coast, but we are in a mountain range. We're in the foothills of the Sierra de Montanches. Montanches is the castle town. There's a ruined castle up on the mountain. Oh, it's so beautiful and picturesque. It's like walking through the pages of Don Quixote. In fact, the street I live on is Calle Cervantes. So, it's that world. And the folk spirit really is alive here. Sadly, as we're seeing in Italy and we're seeing in many, many other countries, a lot of these remote villages are dying because the young folks, there's nothing for them to do. They all want to go to the city rather than create something here. And because the farming industries have been taken over by these huge conglomerates, it's very hard to have economic health. And so this is the most economically depressed part of Spain, and therefore not a huge, but it's a hidden jewel. If you're coming to Spain, come to Extremadura, because it is amazing, dripping with history. My village of 700 people was established in 1228. I know, it's that kind of history. And I ended up here totally by accident. I got stuck here during COVID. My aunt lives in a nearby village. I came to visit her for a few days, and then I got stuck during COVID and I couldn't leave, right? Then I fell in love with the place and the people, and they fell in love with me. And it's just exactly how I want to live at 57, where I want to be. The closest city is 40 miles away. There's no air pollution whatsoever. It's rural, or orange grove, animals, and it's just gorgeous. And the pace of life is slow. And yet we have all the modern amenities. We have Wi-Fi, we have fiber optic cable. I can work remotely doing what I do. My theater is an audio theater company now, right? So I can work from anywhere. I encourage people to become digital nomads, to really think about who you are, think about what you are, and see if there's a way to wrap your arms around the world with your vision, because I've done it. I'm just a guy. It's definitely possible. And so that's what I'm doing. And like I said earlier, I've got my podcast, losttravelerpodcast.com. I'm also an internationally certified grief and survival counselor. And grief and survival wears many, many different hats. It's not just about outliving somebody that you love. It could be grief over a change of career. It could be grief over loss of hair. It could be grief over loss of youth. It could be anything. And so I have openings for clients there. So if someone is looking for guidance in that way, or even universal life skills guidance, how do you elevate your proficiency and where do you look? I help with that. The Lost Travelers Club, losttravelers.club, is an important effort globally. Also, we're an international organization that is an empowerment foundation for parents who outlive their kids. And so we're developing all kinds of programs, and even for siblings and grandparents, and it's really exciting. So check that out. Fund it if you have the wherewithal to. Even a little bit monthly makes a big difference for us. And then the Folklore Theater Company. We are now an audio theater company. So we take stories that are dying with the people that carry them. We're also now exploring adult themed, not just for kids, but full length plays, audio plays. We're looking at doing audio poetry as well. I mean, there's so many layers here that we can, as we're rebranding, we're looking at what else is possible. What is folklore? It's the stories of people, and we all have our stories. And so you can go to folklore.world and find out about us there, and also support our work. We are excited to be developing something fresh, something new. I always look for the things that people are not doing. And if I feel called to it, then I manifest it. So
that is evident. That is so evident. Well, I know that we will have many more conversations, whether they are on podcast or off podcast. And I'm really looking forward to that. We'll make sure to include your links in the show notes. And thank you so much for sharing your journey, your truth, your wisdom with us today. Have some life lessons that everybody needs to be aware of and learn from, and get into who they are. So I really appreciate you.
I appreciate you and all you're doing. And I'm excited to follow your journey and stay in touch. I feel like I've made a new friend, and maybe we'll partner on a project. That'd be fun.
We will be. That's not even a question. So
yes.
And thank you to my listeners. I know this is a little bit of a different episode. I love sometimes to mix it up, bring in somebody who's making a true impact with who they are as a brand in essence, but just as themselves. So I hope that you've learned as much as I have from Henry today. And again, you can follow him. All of this information will be in the show notes. And I'll be back again in a few days with another amazing expert. Until then. Want more? Check out amplifywithannika.com or follow me on socials at amplifywithannika.